Hello, this is Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim. Heavy gunfire on the streets of Beirut. 5 people are reported dead. The army has been deployed. The violence follows a protest over last year's devastating explosion. Our correspondent was there.
There was some jostling, there was some chanting, there were groups all dressed in black moving together around the gates of the Justice Palace. But then we started to hear gunfire from a few streets away, and everything really escalated very quickly indeed.
A man arrested over a deadly bow and arrow attack, which left 5 people dead, was known to Norwegian police.
There had been concerns about his radicalisation in the past. We can also confirm the suspect converted to Islam.
Dozens of people are reported dead in Taiwan after a fire trapped residents inside their apartment block. That's all coming up here on Impact. Welcome back to the programme. At least 5 people have been killed and at least 30 injured in hours of gunfire in the heart of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. The shooting began as supporters of the Shia group Hezbollah and its allies gathered to protest against the investigation into last year's explosion in the city's port. They were seeking the removal of the judge who heads the inquiry. It's not clear exactly who was firing or why. Huge tension surrounds the investigation into the accidental blast, which killed more than 200 people. Hezbollah says the inquiry is biased, but victims of the explosion and many other Lebanese want to see it continue and hold those responsible for what happened to account. The BBC's Anna Foster is in Beirut, and I spoke to her earlier.
There's a cautious quiet at the moment. I say cautious because there's been rolling gunfire here for several hours now, the sound of RPGs. I just want to show you how things look here in the centre of Beirut at the moment. You'll see the army out on the streets. They have been here for the last few hours. You'll see that they're armed. We did see earlier on today, and this is one of the things that's been discussed certainly by the Interior Minister at a very brief press conference, we did witness somebody firing from the top of one of these buildings, and there's a suggestion that some of those protesters were targeted as they moved away from the scene. But this area here was very much the front line just a couple of hours ago. You can see how quiet it is because the Lebanese army have asked people to stay off the streets, but you can also see the impact that it's had. I mean, there's a huge pile just behind me here of broken glass because the windows have been smashed and shot out of some of these apartment buildings. You can see over there are motorbikes, torched and burned motorbikes just on the side of the street. This all, as you said, escalated really, really quickly earlier on. It was a pre-planned protest by Hezbollah and Amal. Nobody, I think, quite expected things to get as violent as they did, as quickly as they did. And now there are diplomatic talks going on behind the scenes between the two sides to try and calm things down, and the army is still here prepared in case that gunfire starts once again.
Anna, just tell us what the leadership is saying, what the Prime Minister is saying, what the Interior Minister is saying.
Well, all of this started because of a political row, essentially, over, as you said in your introduction, the Beirut port explosion and the judge who's running that, Judge Tarek Bitar. Now, the day before yesterday, there was a very fractious cabinet meeting that had to end early because they couldn't decide between them what the future of the judge should be. Now, leaders have called for calm. The Interior Minister, as you mentioned, he used the expression snipers. He talked about shooters actually directly targeting people on the ground. There is still a real sense of confusion here. I mean, this area where I'm talking to, it's between Shia and Christian neighbourhoods, so we believe that this was a sectarian clash. But there was clearly some preparation went into it because there were hours of gunfire earlier, lots and lots of RPG fire. And the question now is how they try and de-escalate that with all of the other issues that Lebanon has going on at the moment that we've talked about on the programme, Yalda, the economic issues that it's facing, the fact that people are tired and frustrated, and the tensions are really simmering, and what the politicians and sectarian leaders can do to try and cool that down.
Yeah, and Anna, despite the economic issues and the poverty that the people of Lebanon are currently facing, it has been a long time since the people of Beirut have seen their streets virtually turn into a war zone.
That's true, and it's worth mentioning, and I'm going to show you the scene behind me again just to make the point that this is a street where people live and where people work. These are apartment buildings. This is, there are shops that they're obviously all shuttered and boarded up now, but this is the centre of town. This is life. This is not something happening away in a far-off enclave. And it brings back very difficult memories for a certain generation of Lebanese who lived through the civil war, of course, and who've now seen, there were pictures on social media this morning of people, families being basically sort of run out of their apartments by the armed forces to try and take them to safety. There were photographs of children in a school hiding under their desks, crouching in the corridors. And as you say quite rightly, these are scenes that haven't been seen in Lebanon for really quite a long time now, and they bring back very difficult and distressing memories for a whole generation of people who've seen that before and who are desperately hoping that things don't go that way again.
That's our correspondent Anna Foster there. Well, the Washington Post's Sarah Dadouche is in Beirut. She described what the situation was like in the capital.
Right now, it's a bit quiet, actually, for the first time in about 4 hours. It's quieted down a bit, but for a while, it was about 4 hours of nonstop gunshots. There were at least 5 explosion sounds that we heard. My house shook and the windows shook at the second one, which was probably from the RPGs being launched. I was just out. I just got back home from visiting a hospital where most of the wounded, most of the dead have been transported to. They've had at least so far 4 killed. The scene outside was hectic. It was grown men crying. Many people were armed. It's very unclear if they were plainclothes policemen or if they were supporters who were just armed. It was very tense. Media was very much not welcome there. Yeah, that's what it's like right now.
Sarah, I mean, this really is quite a traumatic time for the Lebanese people, for the people of Beirut. I'm seeing and reading here that a nearby school teachers asked infants, the children, to lay flat on the ground with their hands on their heads. A woman inside her house was killed because of this stray bullets. I mean, this is an incredibly difficult time for a country already grappling with an economic crisis and poverty.
Exactly. I mean, people are still have still not gotten over the traumatic experience that was August 4th, 2020 last year, which is the reason why this protest happened in the first place, because the Hezbollah supporters and Yemen movement supporters were protesting the judge who has been trying to arrest different political leaders. And so this is very alarming, especially because this is the highest death toll we've seen from clashes from inside of Beirut since probably 2008. So, tensions are very high, which is a very oft-used phrase, but there's no better way to explain it.
Yeah, and it really gives you a sense of not only is this country dealing with this economic crisis and a weak and corrupt leadership and government, but these tensions under the surface between Hezbollah and the Christian militia, there's still really no clarity who is in those buildings and who was firing.
We still don't know. There was a Lebanese Forces MP who tweeted that this was not a fight between different factions or different sects or different areas, that this was a fight between Hezbollah and the Free Lebanese. A lot of people took it to mean that the Lebanese forces had at least sanctioned these attacks, but we really cannot know for sure. We don't know. I've been in touch with the media coordinator from Hezbollah. They're being very careful about not pointing fingers towards anyone, and they're insisting that until the truth is reached, they're not going to be pointing fingers towards any specific party or anyone, any specific affiliation.
That was Sarah Dadouche from the Washington Post there. Now, police in Norway say a man suspected of killing 5 people using a bow and arrow had converted to Islam and had shown signs of radicalization. A 37-year-old Danish man was arrested after 4 women and a man died last night in the southern town of Kongsberg. Megan Patterson has the latest.
A single arrow in a wall. Evidence of the brutal attack which left 4 women and a man dead and wounded 2 others. A 37-year-old man arrested and charged. Police had concerns about his radicalisation in the past.
We can't at the moment go into the details of what those concerns were. However, we have and continue to follow up on the information and tips that come in. We can also confirm the suspect converted to Islam.
Officers were called to Kongsberg's west side at around 6:15 yesterday evening. Witnesses describe people running away from a man armed with a bow and arrows. His victims were all aged between 50 and 70, some inside a supermarket when the attack started.
One witness said he saw police firing a warning shot, and the police have confirmed that there was a warning shot fired during the apprehension.
Police told a Norwegian news agency the attacker also used other weapons during the incident, but did not give further details. His parents, they say, are Danish and Norwegian. There have been several lone individual attacks in Norway in the last decade, but this is the most fatalities since far-right extremist Anders Breivik murdered 77 people in 2011. The Norwegian Prime Minister, in his first day in the job, said the country was in shock.
My thoughts go out to those relatives who have been affected by this. I've been in touch with people in Kongsberg who witnessed this utterly surreal incident. My thoughts are with them as well. Also to the police and emergency services who are doing what they can to reassure people.
Norway's police are not routinely armed. After this attack, the police directorate has ordered all officers nationwide to carry firearms as an extra precaution. Megan Patterson, BBC News.
Carrie-Anne Sand is the mayor of Kongsberg and spoke to me a little earlier.
It's been a shock for all of us, and we still can't believe what happened last night.
What more can you tell us about this attacker? I understand the police has named him.
Well, I'm not sure if I have so very much to tell. He is 37 years old, and apparently has been in contact with the police earlier for minor crimes. But last night he went to attack and killed, as you said, 5 people and hurt 2. And he scared a lot of people, since this was in an area of the town where it's shops and residential areas, and also children activities.
Did he have any kind of connection with the town, or is it just completely random?
Well, he was a citizen here. He was not originally born here in Kongsberg, but had moved here, and so you can say he was one of us.
Yeah, and as you say, known to the authorities, known to the security forces, and on their radar. And police say they're now looking into this attack as an act of terrorism. That must have in itself shocked the town.
Yes, I think that adds a new dimension to this attack. I agree on that. But I think what kind of label we put on this attack, it's still a horrifying thing that we expired last evening. But of course, people get more frightened when this terror suspicious came up. But the next days will show us how we'll be able to get through this.
Yeah, just tell us a little bit more about the victims.
The victims are between 50 and 70 years old, 4 women and a man. That's all we know. That's the 5 who died, and the 2 injured was 1 policeman and another civilian.
And also just tell us about your town. Is it usually quite a peaceful place? What's the atmosphere like?
I would say that it's very peaceful, and I mean, people know almost everybody, and so we really didn't expect this to happen, and so it was a shock for all of us that something could like this happen on a Wednesday afternoon.
That was the mayor of the Norwegian town Kongsberg there. Now, 46 people are known to have died in a fire in a rundown building in southern Taiwan. Residents were trapped inside their flats on the upper floors of the 13-story block in the city of Kaohsiung. Firefighters said piles of unused items on lower floors had made the rescue more difficult. The building's lower section had once housed restaurants, karaoke bars and a cinema, but those units had been abandoned. Many of the people who lived in the building were old or had disabilities. Our Asia-Pacific editor, Michael Bristow, gave me more details.
This has been a terrible tragedy. 46 people have died, as you mentioned there, and it seems that the layout of this particular building contributed, or that's how it seems initially, contributed to the number of people who died. As you described there, most of the lower floors of this building were abandoned. There were previously commercial units, but no one was occupying them then at the moment. And the fire appears to have started there and spread upwards to the residential floors, about 4 or 5 residential floors with 100 flats where most people were living. The firefighters say that because the lower floors have been abandoned, lots of things have been left there, so it was very difficult to get in and get people out. Lots of people who lived in the flats at the top of this building were old, who were disabled. They found it difficult to get out, and a lot of them, most of them, died of smoke inhalation. So it seems that the actual nature of this building contributed to the number of deaths. And also, obviously, questions are going to be asked how safe this was if most of it was most of it was abandoned and essentially derelict.
Yeah, indeed. And we're just looking at some of those images, just devastating, the fact that these were the elderly and disabled in that building. But also, Michael, just help our audience understand how unusual this is for Taiwan in terms of its the structures of buildings and safety.
Well, it's reasonably unusual. Around 25 years ago, there was a fire at a nightclub that killed about 60 or so people. So they have had similar incidents before, but Taiwan's a modern, developed country. It has a good government which looks out for fire standards to make sure that buildings meet strict codes. Those codes aren't always followed, it has to be said, and I've been to Taiwan on a number of occasions, and some buildings do seem not to have perhaps the best escape routes or the best design. And in essence, that's what the firefighters are saying today, that escape routes, access points to this building weren't properly open and clear. And they're warning other people who live in other residential buildings to make sure that they can get out of their buildings just in case something happens. So quite a mixed history in terms of Taiwan, developed country, but they have had some incidents before. And accidents like this are certainly not unknown.
Michael Bristow there a little earlier. Stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come. It's Where's Wally, but with walruses. Can you help conservationists count them by scouring satellite images?
Parts of San Francisco least affected by the earthquake are returning to life. But in the marina area where most of the damage was done, they're more conscious than ever of how much has been destroyed.
In the 19 years since he was last here, he's gone from being a little-known revolutionary to an experienced and successful diplomatic operator.
It was a 20-pound bomb which exploded on the 5th floor of the Grand Hotel, ripping a hole in the front of the building.
This government will not weaken. Democracy will prevail.
It fills me with humility and gratitude to know that I have been chosen as the recipient of this foremost of earthly honor.
This Catholic nation held its breath for the men they call the 33. And then bells tolled nationwide to announce the first rescue, and Chile let out an almighty roar.
This This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. President Biden has announced longer hours at America's largest port, Los Angeles, to try to help ease supply chain blockages in the run-up to the Black Friday and Christmas shopping seasons. Suppliers around the world are struggling to cope with the rise in consumer demand as countries emerge from pandemic lockdowns. The shortages are causing drastic price rises in everything from food to energy to consumer goods. Earlier, I spoke to Claire Jones, economics reporter at the Financial Times. She told me why these log jams are causing such a global problem.
So what we've seen in the global shipping industry, and indeed the global logistics industry, is really a perfect storm of factors leading to these log jams all over the world. You've had factory closures, you've had port closures, you've had limits on productivity because of pandemic-related restrictions. But what's often missing in the debate about this has been what's happened to demand. Most of the time we spend our disposable income on services. We go out, we go to concerts, we go to restaurants. That hasn't been happening so much during the pandemic. So demand for consumer durables has rocketed. And most of those consumer durables that reach us in the US and in Europe come from abroad. So what you've actually seen over the past 12 months is a boom in world trade, and that's really putting pressure on the system at the time when you've also got these supply shortages and other difficulties relating to the pandemic.
And Claire, it really gives you a sense of how closely this supply chain is tied together, because when a congestion like this happens, it impacts the entire world.
It does indeed, and especially like if you look at the situation, the news we've had last night from the US, where President Biden has said he wants the Port of Los Angeles to operate 24/7. Now, Los Angeles is a tremendously busy port. It's the busiest in the US, so this might help, but it can't entirely solve the problem, because on the other side of the Pacific, we've got delays in ships coming into Shanghai. So it really is, like you say, a global system. And throughout the US supply chain, you've got shortages of truck drivers, which we've seen in the UK and Europe too. You've got a lack of warehouse space. So it really is not just one port that's the problem here. It's a global issue.
That was Claire Jones from the FT speaking to me there a little earlier. Now, the loss of Arctic sea ice is one of the most visible signs of climate change on our planet, and it's having a dramatic effect on walrus populations. The British Antarctic Survey is asking for our help to study satellite images of around 15,000 square miles to see how many walruses we can spot. And they've roped in the scouts to help with the counting. Well, as our global science correspondent Rebecca Morell explains, it's not as easy as you might think.
Huge, blubbery and a bit grumpy, walruses are easy enough to spot. But thanks to their remote Arctic location, they're hard to count, and we don't know how many of these giant beasts there are. Now, using satellite images, the plan is to locate every Atlantic and Laptev Sea walrus. And scientists say this is essential because climate change means these animals are under threat.
The sea ice on which they live most of the year is rapidly diminishing, and they're having to change their behaviour and come out onto land much more often. That's almost certainly got some detrimental effect to them, but we're not sure how much their population is being affected by that. Hopefully this project will tell us that important information.
We've been taking images of the Earth from space for more than 60 years, but our view has changed dramatically. In the 1980s, satellites could only see objects 30 metres in size, but they quickly improved, and a few years later they could see features 10 metres across. Today though, the most advanced imaging satellites can see details down to just 30 centimetres, and this has transformed our view of the natural world.
Even at that resolution, counting walruses is still a challenge. So the scouts in East Molesey have been drafted in to help. The first job, scouring through a search area of 25,000 square kilometres to find any images that have a walrus in.
It's quite hard because there's like rusty barrels and rocks that look really similar. It's kind of a challenge as well because they're all hidden and you have to try and search for them.
But the project is going to need a lot more people to help with the count.
We've loaded up more than 600,000 images onto the Walrus from Space platform, which you can access through the WWF UK website. And we're calling on at least 500,000 people to help us search for and then count walrus on the platform.
The future is uncertain for this icon of the Arctic. Their icy home is changing faster than anywhere else on the planet. But now, with satellite technology and the help of the public, we should finally find out how many walruses there are and see how they fare in the years to come. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Now, 3 years after it was partially shredded, a Banksy artwork is to be put up for auction at Sotheby's again later today. The iconic image of a girl with a balloon was partially shredded live in front of an audience just seconds after it sold for $1.4 million in 2018. The work was renamed Love in a Bin by the artist himself and is expected to fetch between $5 and $8 million. Now, of course, we'll have lots more on the stories we've covered here today on BBC World News throughout the day, so do stay with us. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at BBC Yalda Hakim. I'll see you again on Monday. Goodbye for now.